Northern New York Community Podcasts, stories from the heart of our community. Welcome to this edition of the Northern New York Community Podcast. I'm your host, Max Del Signor. Before we open our conversation, it is important to take a moment and thank our partners, WPBS-DT and Northern New York Community Foundation. Because of their support, we are able to capture and share these meaningful stories about the importance of giving back in Northern New York. Now, let's sit back, relax, and enjoy this next interview with Charlie and Higouhi Owens. This couple has spent their lifetime in St. Lawrence County. They have worked, raised their children, and given back to the area that means a great deal to them. Charlie and Hi will share memories growing up in St. Lawrence County, how the communities have evolved, and the lasting personal lessons taught through their community philanthropy. It is our pleasure to have Charlie and Hi join us here on the podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Now, you're both North Country natives. Could you share just a little bit about where you grew up and where you met? Charlie, I'll start with you.
Okay. Well, I was born in Ogdensburg. I was about 12 when we moved to Massena, and I entered the 7th grade in Massena. I always felt that I was a Massena native, kind of, and I met there. We became classmates, and we were classmates all through school and graduated together in 1954. But during that period of time, we kind of went our separate ways. It wasn't until after I was in college, between I think my second and third year, or about there, when our relationship developed. In August of '54, after I graduated, we were married.
Now, Hi, it was skating was actually the place where the two of you initially met, correct?
Right. At the Alcoa field. Alcoa had
the hockey rink at the Alcoa field.
Yeah.
Back then, different departments in Alcoa had hockey teams. When the ice was open to the community, and that's where we kind of met early on.
Now, Hi, your family settled in Massena, obviously many years before you were born, but their arrival to the States is a pretty fascinating story. Can you share just the journey that your family took fleeing the Armenian genocide between 1915 and 1918?
right.
And the stops that they took to be able to finally settle in Massena and Northern New York?
Well, my father and my grandmother escaped the genocide. My grandfather, on my father's side, had a brother and a sister, and his father were all massacred. My mother lived in a different area of Turkey. She had 2 sisters, and one died. The other settled in Toronto. And, okay, let's stay with my father's side first. Sure. They took a boat from Syria to Ellis Island and ended up in Detroit because my grandmother's brother lived there. And they went. They worked for Ford. My father worked at the milk plant. But I had an uncle who had dry cleaning in Massena, who had an orphan daughter that needed care. So my father and my grandmother moved to Massena to take care of her.
Was there any difficulty with the family transitioning to the United States or finding work or anything?
Apparently no. They had to learn the language. My father went to night school and took a course. Well, I don't know how long he took it, but he did not get along with the teacher, so he quit.
He was hoping night school was going to be the gateway to kind of conquering that barrier in language.
Right. But that's how they got to Massena. Now, my mother and her mother went from, well, she lived in Adana, Turkey. and their father abandoned them, and so they went to Paris, where my great uncle, who was a priest, to stay with them. My mother went to school in Paris up to 8th grade. Her sister in Toronto made passage for her to come to the States, and she ended up in Montreal. She came over on a canard. How my father and my mother met was through my aunt.
Oh.
They were married in Montreal in 1930, I think.
So given that life experience for your family, and really being a part of such a turbulent time in world history, and coming to the States to try to get acclimated, hearing about what your family went through, how did that impact you as you grew up and as you became a mother and a parent?
I guess I just appreciated I was able to do what I could, where they weren't able to do much to begin with. They did what they could, and I guess we did too.
Charlie, as you noted, you both actually went to college and graduated from the Albany area. I went to business school, and you from the pharmacy school, and married shortly thereafter, as you mentioned, in 1954. What brought both of you back to the North Country after college was completed?
Well, probably my family, my mother and father were still here, my brother, and we lived all our life here. And I found employment as a pharmacist. My father was a pharmacist. As soon as I turned 16, he kind of suggested I get a working papers. So I took a suggestion. And I went to work on the fountain, Sun Stool Fountain, when I turned 16. I had never been away from New York State, so to speak, growing up, so I was comfortable. Never had any great desire to live anywhere else.
A follow-up question to that. What do you appreciate the most about being born, raised, and living in the North Country?
It's a safe environment. I think socially and so forth, comfortable. I just feel at home in it. As much as I traveled when I worked and saw the country and so forth, I think it's hard to beat this area as far as the beauty of it, the simple lifestyles and the opportunities. They're here if you look for them. And like I say, it's relatively crime-free, and I think the public education system is good. We have probably all as much of an opportunity here as we would have any other place. So I guess we just became a native.
You mentioned after you graduated college and coming back to the North Country, that was a really bustling era for St. Lawrence County in northern New York, and in particular the St. Lawrence Seaway and Alcoa were really thriving at that time.
Right.
Can you each share just what you remember about being back in this area and living here in the 1950s, 1960s, what it was like with the Seaway and Alcoa and business really thriving in the county?
You want me to take that first?
Sure, go ahead.
Well, Massena was an entirely different community than Ogdensburg was, I think, as I remember. Massena, with Alcoa, had more, I shouldn't say educated people, but they brought in engineers, and they would stay a few years and move on, and there was always, they were more aggressive. I guess, I don't know if the word aggressive is right in Massena, enthusiastic about their community. They supported their community. And then there was a large Armenian community, there's a large Italian community, a large French community, all in that area, and everybody got along. It was, the school was good, a lot of spirit there, and there just seemed to be an element of enthusiasm in the community that I hadn't experienced anywhere before. I don't know whether that answers your question.
It does. It does partly. You mentioned that with engineers and those of skilled trades coming into work for two booming industries, in particular the Seaway. In our previous conversation, you had mentioned that it seemed like every day in Massena was like the day before Christmas.
Yeah,
just so much activity and things happening, and the enthusiasm, as you mentioned before. Can you talk a little bit, Charlie, just about the Seaway and its impact in the area from what you saw?
The Seaway really got underway in 1955, and there was some apprehension, I think, within the community, just what is going to happen. In the end, really nothing happened, other than the fact that crime didn't go up. It wasn't going to turn into a mill city or something like that. And business was good. People working on the Seaway blended right into the community. It was a bustling community. I really don't know how to put it much different. It's from a business standpoint. Some of the experiences I had in the store and stuff I'll never forget, because Kinney had remodeled their old store and expanded it, and we had a brand new store. A lot of the contractors, when they had special needs, would come to us. We supplied some very unique items to them that today we couldn't. For example, we used to sell ether by the gallon in the wintertime to all the contractors. They used it to start their diesel engines. One time, company representative came in and wanted a ton of sulfur. Well, the company handled bulk sulfur. Gardeners and stuff used it, but not by the ton. So I called the pharmaceutical buyer and said, I need a ton of sulfur. Took a little convincing, but he said, I'll get back to you. So about 10 minutes later, he called back and he says, it's ordered. So in 2 or 3 days, and I think it came from Slack Chemical in Carthage, but it came in 50 40-pound craft paper bags, all covered with dust. I'll never forget unloading it at the foot of the conveyor, because everything just was full of dust. The most unique or different prescription I ever filled happened in Massena. Cold winter night, the clerk handed back a prescription to me to be filled. It was written by a local physician, and it was written for a pediatric antibiotic syrup, a teaspoonful every 6 hours. I looked in the heading, and there was a lady's name there, but after it, it was the word monkey. And that caught my attention. And I looked up, and standing in front of the counter was a lady in a fur coat. And out of the fur coat stuck the head of a monkey. So I went out and questioned what she was doing in Massena in the middle of the winter with a monkey. And she went on to tell me that her husband was an engineer with one of the companies on the Seaway, and he had been stationed in Central America for 4 years. And she'd acquired this monkey and got sick, presumably, probably pneumonia, and not knowing where to go, she took it to the local doctor, had a little clinic there. I never saw her after that. Don't remember seeing the monkey after that.
So was that the first and last time you filled out a prescription for a monkey?
Yeah, it's the only one. The only one. Another interesting time was one of the big three television companies wanted to do a documentary on the Seaway. And they wanted to do it on a Sunday afternoon in the summer and so forth. They wanted to do a segment on the local input, and they wanted to do it in our store. Ed Moses was our store manager at the time, and he was a head of the Chamber of Commerce, or the Downtown Businessmen's Association. So we agreed, and Ed got the mayor and the chief of police and the various dignitaries and so forth together. The day before they were going to broadcast nationwide, they wanted to do a run-through. So I think it was either a Friday or Saturday before that. They made arrangements. And they come with a crew, and of course back then there was no tape television. What you saw on your screen was happening somewhere. So in come the crew. The camera was just a huge camera standing at eye level on a tripod with wheels, coupled with lights, floodlights, to light the area, and an announcer who would be doing the interviewing and the announcing and so forth, and a director who was on the telephone to New York. So they got it all set up, and the director got the go-ahead, and so he turned the camera on, they turned the lights on, blew the whole circuit. Everything went dark. Cash register went down. What to do? Well, Ed knew the electrician that had wired the area about 3 or 4 years before that. Rounded him up, got him there, and I don't know what he did, but on that Sunday afternoon in the summer, Kinney's was on television coast to coast for about 5-10 minutes.
Wow.
It was interesting.
Good exposure for the local brand.
Yeah. We had a fella there that could make a nice sign, freehand. So he made the little sign that said, Kinney Drugs welcomes you to Massena, New York, or something like that. He hung it on the front of the cash register. Plan was that they'd focus the camera on the register and then back away and then swing it around through the store kind of, and then come to this group and do the interviews. Well, the director saw that sign. He said, that's got to go. He said, we're not advertising Kinney, drug to coast to coast. So that was interesting.
Charlie, what was it like to continue the family legacy that you had? You know, your father worked at Kinney's. You kind of followed a little bit in his footsteps and even became vice president for Kinney's at one time. What does that mean to you, just the family ties to a local business for a long time?
Well, my father worked for an independent drugstore man in Ogdensburg. And there were 3 other drugstores in Ogdensburg at the time. And in 1943, they were pretty tough years, and he went out of business. So my father was out of work. The local pharmacies approached him, and then Harold Kinney approached him. And so my father and her mother decided they'd make a change and go to Massena. As it worked out, I remember sitting at the dinner table. I guess it was the fall of my senior year. He said, "What are you going to do?" It was a foregone conclusion I'd go to college probably. I said, I don't know. I hadn't really thought too much, but I'd worked on the fountain, and I'd worked with him, and I said, well, maybe I'll go to pharmacy school. He said, well, if you do, he says, you'll never get rich, but you'll always have food on the table. I thought that sounded pretty good. I like to eat. So away I went, and the Kinney Company, not personally, but I knew the Kinney family, and I knew a lot of the employees. At that time, Kinney's only had, I think, 7 stores when I started. And so it was kind of a family affair. And they're the only ones that ever gave me a paycheck. As it was, I started as a staff pharmacist in Massena, and then in 1958, things were beginning to wind down in Massena. The Seaway was winding down, but to go back just a bit, right at that period of time, from about 56 to maybe the beginning of the 60s. In 56, Alcoa had a big layoff, but the construction was there. A lot of those people went to construction. Also, at the same time, they were building General Motors and Reynolds Metals. So everything worked very well, and that maintained that period of prosperity for a while. But then when I went to Malone in 58, I opened Kinney's number 12 store, managed that for 15 years, and then was promoted to store supervisor, moved to Gouverneur in 1973, and they had 21 stores at that time. And then in 1979, I was made a vice president and was in charge of purchasing pharmaceuticals and head of the pharmacy warehouse. By that time, we had probably about 40, 50 stores.
Significant growth by then.
Yeah, and probably around the mid-'80s, I kind of lost track now. Pharmacy warehouse was moved up to the main warehouse that you see on Route 11. I was in charge of all purchasing. Then the warehouse manager reported to me, and I got involved in advertising and so forth at the same time. And then in 1994, I retired. I was on the board of directors at the time. I stayed on the board until I was 72, and then I went off the board because of age and so forth. But December 24th, 1955, my Christmas gift from the company was 1 share of stock, Kinney's. The Kinney family always felt that people in areas of responsibility, pharmacists perhaps, department heads, key people, should own stock in the company. And they promoted that. And at Christmas time, when I was a store manager, I got 2 shares. And from time to time, the Kinney family would make some of their own stock available. And I bought when I could. So over the years, I acquired a substantial investment in the company.
And your investment together as a couple went, obviously beyond the profession. You guys were very involved in your community in myriad ways, whether it be Rotary or your church. Can you talk a little bit about where some of those key values of philanthropy, where they came from? Hi, I'll start with you first on that question.
I think from family first. I guess from my parents, it was always drummed into us that if we could, we would. They were refugees, and so My father sponsored a refugee and brought him over here and put him to work. And my dad had a dry cleaning store, so he brought him over and to teach him the trade. But unfortunately, he was not very appreciative. He thought that the streets were going to be paved with gold, and he was going to marry the daughter of the one that sponsored him, and he got a surprise. But I mean, I felt, my dad did this for him to help him, and he was not very appreciative.
How old were you at the time, Hi?
What's that?
How old were you at the time?
Well, I had just got home from Albany, from college, and so my father was not very appreciative of his idea of marrying his daughter, and he eventually left Massena because there wasn't a big enough place for him, and he eventually went to the city. I don't know where he went. It was good riddance.
Didn't quite fit the vision he was looking for.
But here he was. We were trying to help him. My dad didn't have that, wasn't rich from a dry cleaning business, and we fitted a room for him in the house. But as far as my church, I guess churches are philanthropists, I guess. I tried to help. As I told you before, I played the organ in church and they charged me. And I helped put on fall bazaars and made soup for them. I said, Charles, do you mean philanthropy just has to be money or your services?
It's a good point because one of the things that we try to convey as a community foundation, as the Northern New York Community Foundation does, in terms of inclusiveness and philanthropy, because it is more than just your means financially, it's your means with your talents and service, as you said, Hi. I think that's just equally as important when it comes to understanding philanthropy.
Yeah.
The dollar plays a part in that equation, but your time and volunteering is equally important, if not more so, depending on the cause.
Right. And we try helping them, both churches. We don't go to the same church. Money-wise also, whenever something comes up, like the roof.
Mm-hmm. What's it like to be able to do all of this giving back together as a couple? What does that mean to you?
Well, I think it kind of brings us closer together. I mean, if we are focused on the same charity or share a common interest in it, I think about using the scholarship as an example of that. When the company in 2008 bought back all the stock of former employees, at that time I knew we would have more than we needed. We were living comfortably. Our needs were being met. The family was pretty much on their own. We got together and said, what are we going to do with this? To benefit somebody, something. You could give it to a church, you can give it to a hospital, you can give it here or there. But as we talked about it, I think the STEM program was in the media, in the newspapers and stuff. And that caught my eye. And I've always felt very strongly about education. With 4 good colleges, top-rate colleges, 2 private, 2 a part of the SUNY system in St. Lawrence County, and 17 high schools, I believe, in St. Lawrence County. Put all that together, and you've got a large student base right here in St. Lawrence County. We kind of gravitated towards a scholarship, a STEM scholarship. I'm a firm believer in the sciences. I think that's probably what's made this country the country it is today. I think two things: the form of government, the constitutional. We're a constitutional republic, which gives the individual rights that aren't available to many others around the world. In that environment, this country has produced Alexander Graham Bell and the telephone, Bill Gates and Microsoft, Steve Jobs and the iPod, the iTelephone. Look at where the telephone has developed from Alexander Graham Bell's day to the smartphone. Thomas Watson, I think his name was, that tinkered on automation and the technology of automation and stuff. Now today it's IBM. So education come to appreciate more and more the older I get.
Is there a hope, too, that a scholarship like this can inspire the students who are fortunate enough to receive it to maybe stay locally as well and maybe invest whatever they receive from their education from a STEM field to maybe come back to the North Country and contribute as they can?
Yeah, it'd be nice if that happened. But
That's
quite
wishful
frankly,
wishful thinking.
I don't really see it happening to the degree that we'd like to see it happen. Because this area, I think, its biggest future lives in the area of agriculture and tourism. We've witnessed what's happened to Massena, even with the power and everything there, with Alcoa and General Motors and Reynolds. Even with all that going for them, today we've lost General Motors and Reynolds, and Alcoa is very tenuous. So it would be nice
To go back to doing things as a couple. I think we were both fortunate to have parents who set fine examples for both of us.
Hi, what are some of those same values that your parents taught you that you've been able to share with your children?
Right. I don't know, just being loving parents, I guess. Learning to appreciate what you have, because we didn't have that much. My kids always wondered why they couldn't have something. And I think that's the biggest value. Appreciate what you have.
You made church a big part of their life. We both, to a degree, but I did most the leadership in that area. My excuse, and it's probably no more than an excuse, is early in my career, I worked every other Sunday, and so she kind of got the kids that way. But from my own experience, growing up, I was president or treasurer of the Sunday school, and my parents were very strong in the church. We both share that background.
When you think about the future of the North Country and St. Lawrence County, Charlie, you touched a little bit on the industries that you think have an opportunity to maybe shine in this area. What kind of role can philanthropy play in the future success of where we live here in the North Country?
This may be one thing It's already happened to a great degree. And that's the Adirondack Park. A lot of that land in the park has been donated and set aside for the use of whoever, the natives as well as the tourists. You can think of the Trudeau Institute in Saranac Lake. Well, that has been here for years and years, and it's the Trudeau family originally, and it stayed with us. I don't know if we'll ever see another General Electric or General Motors or anything in the North Country.
What's the catalyst? If philanthropy can help not reinvent a region, but make it stronger, make it better, and kind of evolve to those changing needs, what can residents here do to give back, to make a community thrive a little bit better, even if those industries are gone? What role can the people play?
I don't know what's here to bring them here, really. I mean, they've got the colleges, of course, but I don't know. Like, they come and live in Gouverneur, and they say there's nothing in Gouverneur. But they're a couple hours, I don't know how long it takes to go to Montreal. Mm-hmm. You've got Carson and St. Lawrence and so forth. Now we have United Helpers based outside of Canton. They're hopefully big doctors and so forth. Mm-hmm. If you haven't got any industry, maybe we have to look at the education and health there. Mm-hmm. If we haven't got that.
Well, I think something you both touched on are good points. I mean, there are destinations nearby, and there are natural resources that, as far as quality of life and beautification of the area, there's plenty of that. And there's plenty of people who have invested their time and their energy and resources to kind of make those sustainable, so that folks can have access to these great quality of life elements that we do get to enjoy. In thinking about that younger generation that you talked about, and what we can do to inspire them to give back as you have, whether it be with a financial gift of their own, or maybe more importantly, just to volunteer their time. What do you think is most important for us or for your generation to do to inspire that next generation coming up? What would it take to inspire them, you think, to give back as you have?
Well, it's on TV.
What would inspire? Maybe some of the, I'd like to think that maybe some of the people that are going to benefit from this scholarship will not forget it, and at some point down the road share some of their success with this area. Obviously, if they're graduating from our schools here, they've lived here and benefited from the quality of life here. And if the scholarship helped them get to where they are going to be in another 30 years, hopefully they'll support the area. I don't know, maybe that's wishful thinking. A few years ago, families didn't stray as much as they do today. Families probably lived within a radius of maybe 50 miles. Like in my own lifetime, my grandfather had a farm. More people lived on farms and lived in villages. And when all that changed, and now our children are farther away than we were ever farther away from our parents.
Yeah, the connectedness between families isn't what it used to be.
No, I don't think so, really. That's a sad thing to say. I think the memories are there and so forth, but they don't celebrate the holidays together. And it's because they've scattered so far away.
A group that stayed very connected, and I think it's one of the first times we've kind of delved into it on this podcast, is people who give in St. Lawrence County. We really haven't touched on this region yet, and we're taking the opportunity to do it now. But there's a really strong connectedness of individuals and couples and families that have made a point to give back and reinvest in St. Lawrence County, just as you have. As you look back and you see, folks who have made an investment of their time and talent or financially to St. Lawrence County, what kind of impact can that have on a community?
It brings them together, I think.
I think of the United Helpers Home and people being scattered. They get a lot of support from people who have scattered, sons and daughters maybe of former moms and dads that benefited from the United Helpers. A lot of them support that financially, not so much maybe by being physically or active there. The same is true with the Remington Museum.
Mm-hmm.
That's supported by people all over the country to a degree, but they're supported very well by people within the county and the surrounding area.
So each of those nonprofit organizations or community causes, as we talked about, have such strong support, donors, volunteers. Certainly leads to, or at least gives you the thinking that at least the future will be bright for philanthropy in St. Lawrence County. Two of you have certainly demonstrated that across your life in many ways. The Evergreen STEM Scholarship is a really good example of that at the Community Foundation, where you hope you'll be able to impact the lives of these students forever in many ways by supporting their education. At the end of the day, for everything that you have done together, if somebody is to ask you, what is the legacy of Charlie and High Owens, what would you hope that to be?
That we were good citizens, I guess. And we're willing to share what we accumulated in life with the people of St. Lawrence County.
I guess I feel about the same, that we're responsible citizens of the community. Responsible citizens. Get along with your neighbor.
Well, it's easy to say that this area, and especially St. Lawrence County, is grateful for your thoughtful philanthropy and your willingness to find ways to make our communities special. It is an important example to share with others, and we believe the next generation will hopefully follow your lead, and you had some good words to impart as part of the interview. Thanks again for coming on the podcast to share your story and just your reflections on what philanthropy has really meant to both of you.
I think, Max, we began to contribute to the Northern New York Community Foundation maybe as far back as 7, 8, 10 years ago. Just the existence of the Northern New York Community Foundation here makes it easy for people like us to practice philanthropy. I don't know who I would ever have turned to administer it. I worked with a fellow in Rochester who would have liked to have, had a hand in it, but that's always there for individuals. But here's an organization that welcomes the participants who want to practice philanthropy. It's a real valuable service to the area.
Well, we certainly appreciate those kind words, and we're certainly honored to be to have the STEM scholarship really be a part of what we administer, and for us to play a small role in your legacy and being able to help these students position themselves for future success. It means a great deal to us.
Looking back, these kids are 18, 19 years old now. What are they going to experience in their lifetime? It just boggles the mind at what they can accomplish given the freedom to do it and the desire to do it.
Well, and it's amazing what's available to them on top of that.
Yeah.
I mean, so as far as accessibility and resources available and scholarships certainly to help them do that as far as their education is concerned.
Take in the area of medicine, Dr. Sabin, one man discovered the polio vaccine. Now it's 2 or 3 drops on the baby's tongue, and there's no more polio. There's no polio in North and South America. There's a little bit, very little, in Pakistan and in some areas of Africa. What a difference that one man made.
It's amazing. Well, on the mission of Rotary, right? I mean, Rotary was the one that really took that on.
They started in 80, I'm going to say about 81, 82. And now Bill Gates and Melinda Gates are supporting it.
Mm-hmm.
Probably the one that may crack cancer, who knows, he may be amongst us right now.
I was going to say, maybe it'll be some of these students that receive a scholarship or, like you said, are living today that maybe we'll see it, maybe we won't, I don't know.
Yeah.
Time will tell. Charlie and Hi, thanks again for your kind words, and many thanks again to all of you for tuning in. Remember, you can listen to other episodes of the Northern New York Community Podcast anytime on your smartphone or any mobile device, and it is always free. Find the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play, or check out our website, www.nnycpodcast.com. Thanks again to PBS and the Northern New York Community Foundation for their support of this production. We will catch you next time on the Northern New York Community Podcast. Northern New York Community Podcasts, stories from the heart of our community.